You don't belong here." The words weren't whispered. They weren't suggested. They were declared loud, public, deliberate. Victoria Ashford's voice cut through the first-class cabin of American Airlines Flight 447 like a blade through silk. Her manicured finger adorned with a diamond ring that cost more than most people's cars pointed directly at the young black woman in seat 3J. The woman in the Stanford Law hoodie. The woman with the worn backpack and noise-canceling headphones. The woman who, according to Victoria, had clearly made a mistake. Or worse, had stolen someone else's seat. "This isn't a student lounge," Victoria announced to the cabin, her voice carrying over the ambient hum of passengers settling in for the flight from Dulles to LAX. "Someone needs to fix this. Now." She stood in the aisle in her $4,000 Chanel suit, her blonde hair styled into an immovable helmet of precision, her executive platinum status radiating from every pore. She expected immediate action. She expected compliance. She expected the world to bend to her will the way it always had. What Victoria didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know as she stood there demanding someone remove the girl from first class, was that in exactly 6 minutes, the most powerful woman on this aircraft would walk through that cabin door. And that woman was about to become Victoria's worst nightmare. The young woman in 3J, Simone Bennett, 22 years old, second-year law student, Rhodes Scholar finalist, didn't move. She sat perfectly still, her laptop open to a case brief on Brown v. Board of Education, her hands resting calmly on the keyboard. Her signature purple highlighter, the one she'd used since Princeton when her roommate said it made text pop like Justice Ginsburg's collars, lay beside her notebook. She'd heard every word. She'd felt the stares from the moment she'd entered the lounge. She knew this dance. She'd performed it at prep school, at Stanford, at every upscale space she'd ever dared to enter in comfortable clothes. But this time was different. This time her mother was about to walk onto the plane. Before we dive into what happens next, tell me something. Have you ever witnessed someone spectacularly misjudge who they were talking to? Have you ever seen someone's prejudice blow up in their face so completely that you couldn't look away? Drop your city in the comments below. And if this story already has you hooked, if you can feel the tension building in that cabin, hit that subscribe button. Because what happens in the next 6 minutes is absolutely legendary. Flight 447 sat at gate B42 moments from departure. The first-class cabin was nearly full. Passengers were stowing bags, accepting pre-departure beverages, settling into their pods for the cross-country journey. The atmosphere should have been one of quiet luxury and anticipation. Instead, the air crackled with tension. Because Victoria Ashford had just made the worst mistake of her life, and she had no idea. 45 minutes earlier, Simone Bennett had walked through the double glass doors of the American Airlines flagship lounge at Dulles International Airport. She carried a worn leather backpack that had seen her through 3 years of undergraduate at Princeton and was now accompanying her through law school at Stanford. She wore black Lululemon leggings, white Air Force One sneakers that were comfortable for the 6-hour flight ahead, and an oversized Stanford Law hoodie in cardinal red with white letters emblazoned across the chest. She looked exactly like what she was, a law student heading home for Thanksgiving break. The lounge was a carefully curated sanctuary of hushed conversations, the distant clinking of ice in crystal glasses, and the faint scent of expensive cologne mixed with the citrus air freshener pumped through the vents. It was designed to separate the truly important from the merely affluent, and the merely affluent from the masses churning through the main terminal beyond the frosted glass walls. Simone found a plush armchair by the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the tarmac. She watched a 777 lumber toward its gate, massive and surprisingly graceful. She'd always loved airports, loved the promise of movement, of going somewhere. This flight would take her home to Los Angeles, to her mother's house in Pacific Palisades, to 2 weeks of rest before the final push of her second year. She pulled out her laptop, opened her constitutional law case brief, Marbury versus Madison, the foundation of judicial review, and began highlighting key passages in her signature purple ink. When a lounge attendant approached with a tray of champagne flutes, Simone shook her head with a small smile, the same polite smile she'd perfected over years of navigating spaces where people watched her too closely. "Could I just have water, please, sparkling? Or still, ma'am, tap is fine. Thank you." The attendant nodded and moved on. Simone slipped her noise-canceling headphones over her ears. Her third pair this year. She was hard on equipment when she studied. Started a lo-fi study playlist and lost herself in Chief Justice John Marshall's opinion, establishing the Supreme Court's power to declare laws unconstitutional. She had a habit of humming under her breath when she was deeply focused, a soft, tuneless sound that drove her roommate crazy, but helped her think. She didn't notice the woman watching her from across the lounge. Not yet. Victoria Ashford had been in the flagship lounge for an hour. She'd arrived early as she always did because she enjoyed the space, the service, the feeling of being somewhere that required credentials to enter. She was on her phone, had been for the past 20 minutes berating an airline employee about some perceived slight in the lounge's amenities. "It is unacceptable," Victoria declared, her voice sharp enough to slice through the lounge's carefully maintained atmosphere of quiet sophistication. Several passengers glanced up, then quickly away. "When I book a flagship first ticket, I expect standards. I am Diamond Elite. I am a 2 million miler. I am a concierge key member. Do you understand what that means?" She paced near the buffet area, her heels clicking against the marble floor with each emphatic word. Her blonde hair didn't move. It had been sprayed into submission that morning. Her makeup was flawless, her jewelry expensive but tasteful, her entire presentation screaming wealth and status. She scanned the lounge as she talked, cataloging the other passengers with the practiced eye of someone who assessed worth at a glance. She recognized a senator from Virginia they'd met at a fundraiser. There was a tech CEO she'd read about in the Wall Street Journal, a federal judge whose name she couldn't recall but whose face was familiar from legal conferences. Her people, her tribe. And then her eyes landed on Simone. Victoria's words stumbled. She recovered quickly, but her gaze had sharpened focused. She saw a young black girl dressed like she was heading to a college library occupying one of the best seats by the window. Her laptop was propped on a battered backpack. She wore sneakers, a hoodie. And was that humming? How did that get in here? The thought arrived sharp and immediate, automatic as breathing. Victoria prided herself on pattern recognition. It was what made her such a successful attorney, the ability to spot discrepancies, to identify what didn't fit. And this girl in this space was a deviation from the pattern. Her mind, trained over 30 years of legal practice to construct narratives from fragments of evidence, spun a story. The girl was probably flying on a buddy pass from a relative who worked at the airline. Or maybe she was one of those diversity initiative summer interns. The airlines were always promoting, given a single, unearned taste of luxury to make the company look good. Or, and Victoria's eyes narrowed, maybe she'd snuck in. It happened. Standards were collapsing everywhere. Victoria unmuted her phone call long enough to snap her fingers at a passing lounge attendant. The young man, Brandon, according to his name tag, altered his path toward her. "Excuse me." Victoria didn't wait for him to speak. She gestured with her chin toward Simone, refusing to even point directly. "That individual over there, is she supposed to be in the flagship lounge? It seems highly irregular." Brandon followed her gaze. He was 27, had worked for American for 5 years, and had learned to navigate difficult passengers with practiced diplomacy. "She's a first-class passenger, ma'am. We verified her credentials at the desk when she checked in." "Are you sure?" Victoria's voice dripped with skepticism. "Did you personally check her identification, her boarding pass?" "She seems..." Victoria paused, let the word hang heavy with implication. "Lost." "Yes, ma'am. She's confirmed for Flight 447 First Class. Is there anything else I can help you with? Victoria waved him away dismissively and returned to her phone call. But her focus was split now. She watched Simone get up from her chair, move to the buffet with easy athletic grace, the kind of natural confidence Victoria had spent thousands on personal trainers to cultivate. The girl took a bottle of water and an apple. Nothing else. Didn't even look at the premium food offerings. Uncouth, Victoria thought, eating like a commoner. Tap water. She doesn't even know how to act in these spaces. Simone felt the stare before she turned around. It was a sensation she'd learned to recognize years ago, that prickle on the back of her neck, that weight of being watched, assessed, judged. The humming stopped. She looked up from her case brief and met the blonde woman's eyes across the lounge. She offered a small, polite, deeply tired smile. The kind of smile that said, "I see you watching me. I know what you're thinking, and I'm too exhausted to care." Then she returned to her reading her purple highlighter, moving steadily across the page. That small gesture, that dismissal, that assertion of equality made Victoria's jaw tighten. The girl had acknowledged being watched and decided she belonged there anyway. The audacity of it made Victoria's blood pressure spike. Simone took a slow breath and turned the page. She knew that look. The "how did you afford this" look. The "something's wrong here" look. She'd felt it at prep school when she'd arrived on full scholarship, at Stanford when she'd walked into her first-year torts class, at the country club her mother occasionally dragged her to for networking events. Usually she could ignore it. Usually she could put on her headphones and disappear into her work. But today, after 3 finals in 4 days and only 4 hours of sleep, that stare felt like sandpaper on her skin. She checked her watch, a simple Timex her grandfather had given her. Mother passed down to her. Boarding in 10 minutes. Just get through this. Get on the plane. Get home. She had no idea that the worst was yet to come. The overhead speaker crackled to life and a cheerful gate agent's voice filled the lounge. "We are now pleased to announce the pre-boarding of American Airlines Flight 447 non-stop service to Los Angeles. We invite our passengers in Flagship First to begin boarding at Gate B42. Once again, Flagship First passengers may now board Flight 447 at Gate B42. Victoria Ashford snapped her briefcase shut with a decisive click. She stood, smoothed her already perfect skirt, and adjusted her jacket. She wanted to be first to the gate, first down the jet bridge, first to claim her seat and settle with her pre-departure champagne before that girl even stepped onto the aircraft. She moved with the purposeful stride of someone who'd spent decades assuming spaces would part for her, and they usually did. She positioned herself directly at the gate desk, cutting smoothly in front of a startled senator who'd been heading in the same direction. "Excuse me," he said mildly. Victoria didn't acknowledge him. She thrust her boarding pass toward the gate agent, a woman named Lucia Martinez, whose smile was professional but whose eyes were tired from an already long shift. "You're checking this carefully, I hope," Victoria said loud enough that her voice carried back to the cluster of passengers forming behind her. "There's been a lot of confusion in the lounge today. We can't be too careful about who gets on these flights." Lucia scanned the boarding pass without changing her expression. Years of dealing with passengers like Victoria had taught her when to engage and when to simply process and move on. "Seat 2A, Ms. Ashford. Welcome aboard." She handed back the pass. "Enjoy your flight." Victoria took it and strode down the jet bridge like she owned the aircraft. Simone waited. She always waited. It was something her mother had taught her years ago, a small act of resistance against the constant pressure to prove she belonged in spaces like this. "Never be in a hurry to get on a plane, baby," her mother had said. "It's not going anywhere without you. Let them all fight for overhead bin space. Let them rush and stress. You arrive when you arrive with dignity intact." So Simone stayed in her seat, finished highlighting the paragraph she'd been reading, carefully capped her purple highlighter, and waited for the initial surge of passengers to clear. When the crowd had thinned to a manageable flow, she closed her laptop, slipped it into her backpack, pulled her headphones down around her neck, and walked calmly to the gate. "Hi, Lucia." Simone's voice was warm, genuine. Lucia's professional mask softened into a real smile. "Simone, how was the lounge? Your mom hasn't arrived yet, I see." "It was fine, thanks." "And no, she's cutting it close as usual. Said she had a call with her clerks that ran long. You know how she is. She's on her way, though. Texted me 5 minutes ago." Lucia scanned Simone's boarding pass. "Seat 3J window. You know the drill. Have a great flight, honey." "Thanks, Lucia. See you on the way back." Simone walked down the jet bridge, unaware that Victoria Ashford had paused halfway down, phone in hand, and had heard every word of that exchange. Victoria's thumb had frozen over her phone screen. She'd been checking her email, but the conversation between the gate agent and that girl had cut through her concentration like an alarm bell. Lucia and Simone knew each other by name. Not just the professional courtesy of reading a boarding pass, but actual familiarity. Warmth. And that comment. "Your mom hasn't arrived yet." Victoria's mind raced. So the girl wasn't alone. She was traveling with her mother, a mother who had calls with clerks that ran long. Clerks meant law firm, or maybe government, or... Victoria's internal calculator spun through possibilities. A politician, a corporate executive, a judge. It didn't matter. The girl was still dressed like a vagrant, still didn't fit the profile, and Victoria's sense of rightness, of proper order, demanded that this be addressed. She hurried the rest of the way down the jet bridge and stepped onto the aircraft, her mind already formulating exactly what she would say. The first-class cabin of the 777 was configured in a 1-2-1 layout with individual pods that offered privacy and luxury. Victoria's seat 2A was on the left side of the cabin, an aisle pod with easy access. The window seat next to her 2D appeared to be empty according to the seat map she'd memorized. Good. Maybe she'd have the row to herself. She stowed her carry-on in the overhead bin with practiced efficiency and settled into her seat. A flight attendant appeared almost immediately, a man in his early 30s with kind eyes and an American Airlines uniform that fit perfectly. "Good afternoon, ma'am. Welcome aboard. May I offer you a pre-departure beverage, champagne sparkling water?" "Champagne," Victoria said without looking at him. She was already opening her copy of the Wall Street Journal, already settling into the routine of a cross-country flight she'd taken hundreds of times. The flight attendant, his name tag read. Jordan Mitchell returned moments later with a glass of champagne in a real crystal flute. He placed it on her tray table with a small cocktail napkin. "Thank you," Victoria said absently. Jordan moved to the next passenger. His professional smile firmly in place, but something in his gut was already sending warning signals. He'd been a flight attendant for 8 years. He'd learned to read passenger energy to spot brewing conflicts before they exploded at 35,000 feet. And the woman in 2A radiated a particular kind of entitlement that often meant trouble. Simone stepped into the first-class cabin and was immediately greeted by Jordan's warm smile. "Welcome aboard." His voice was genuinely cheerful. "You must be Ms. Bennett. Seat 3J, right down here on the left. May I help you with your bag?" "I've got it, thanks." Simone lifted her backpack, heavier than it looked, filled with casebooks and her laptop, and effortlessly swung it into the overhead bin above her seat. The motion revealed the back of her hoodie. Stanford Law in bold white letters. Jordan noticed. He also noticed the way the woman in 2A's newspaper had lowered slightly the way her eyes tracked Simone's movement with laser focus. "Can I get you a pre-departure beverage?" Jordan asked Simone. "Water, juice? Champagne?" "Just water would be great. Thank you." "Still or sparkling?" "Sparkling, please." Simone slid into her window seat, pulled out her laptop again, and opened her case brief. She was so close to finishing this section. If she could just get through the next 10 pages before takeoff, she'd be ahead of schedule for the break. She put her headphones back on, started humming softly without realizing it, and disappeared into Brown versus Board of Education. Daniel Rodriguez boarded 3 passengers later. He was 42, the founder of a successful cybersecurity firm and a frequent traveler. He'd upgraded himself to first class for this flight using miles because he had a pitch meeting in LA tomorrow and wanted to arrive rested. He took his seat in 4A directly behind Victoria and immediately felt the tension. It was subtle but unmistakable the way Victoria's shoulders were rigid, the way she kept glancing toward the row behind her, the way her jaw was set in a line that spoke of brewing confrontation. Daniel had been on the receiving end of that energy before. As a Mexican-American man who'd built his company from nothing, he'd faced his share of people who assumed he didn't belong in first class, who'd questioned his credentials, who'd made their discomfort with his presence painfully clear. He pulled out his phone and sent a quick text to his wife. About to witness something. May need to document. Call you when we land. Then he opened his email and pretended to work, but his attention was firmly fixed on the row ahead of him. 2 more passengers boarded. Ashley Cooper, a consultant from Boston, took seat 5B. Carlos Mendoza, a businessman Daniel recognized from industry conferences, settled into 6A. The cabin was nearly full. Only 1 seat remained empty. 3F, the aisle seat, directly next to Simone. Victoria stared at that empty seat like it personally offended her. Jordan moved through the cabin, helping passengers stow bags, offering beverages, doing the 1,000 small tasks that preceded departure. But he kept one eye on Victoria. He'd seen that look before, that calculation, that decision forming behind someone's eyes. He moved to the front of the cabin and picked up the phone that connected to the gate. "Lucia, do we have an ETA on the passenger in 3F? We're close to door closure." Lucia's voice came back. "She's on her way. Just cleared security. Should be here in about 3 minutes." Justice Bennett is always cutting it close. Jordan froze. Justice Bennett. Yeah. Justice Nicole Bennett? You didn't know her daughter's already on board? She's in... 3J Jordan finished. His stomach dropped. Justice Nicole Bennett. Supreme Court Justice Nicole Bennett, one of the 9 most powerful legal minds in the country, was about to board his flight, and her daughter was sitting right behind a woman who looked ready to start an incident. Jordan hung up the phone and moved quickly back into the cabin. He caught Simone's eye and gave her a small, reassuring smile. She returned it confused by his sudden attention, then went back to her reading. Victoria chose that moment to make her move. Victoria's champagne sat untouched on her tray table. She'd been staring at the Wall Street Journal for 5 minutes without reading a single word. Her entire focus was on the row behind her, on the girl in the Stanford Law hoodie who was typing away on her laptop with the kind of casual confidence that made Victoria's blood simmer. And that humming. That soft, tuneless humming that Victoria could barely hear, but that somehow made everything worse. She turned in her seat, not subtly, not discreetly, but with a deliberate motion designed to be noticed, and looked directly at Simone. Simone felt the weight of the stare immediately. She'd been deep in her reading of Justice Warren's opinion in Brown versus Board, the landmark 1954 case that had declared school segregation unconstitutional. The irony of reading about racial discrimination while experiencing it in real time wasn't lost on her, but she'd trained herself not to react. She kept her eyes on her screen, kept highlighting with her purple pen, kept breathing steadily. The humming stopped. The stare continued. Daniel Rodriguez in 4A watched the whole thing unfold. He saw Victoria's head turn, saw the way her eyes fixed on Simone, saw the calculation happening behind that rigid expression. His hand moved slowly toward his phone on the armrest. Ashley Cooper in 5B noticed too. She'd been scrolling through Instagram, but something about the atmosphere in the cabin had shifted. She glanced up and saw the blonde woman in 2A staring at the young black woman in 3J with an intensity that seemed designed to intimidate. Ashley's instincts, honed by years of navigating corporate America as a queer woman, recognized the dynamic immediately. She put her phone on her lap ready. Simone's fingers paused on her keyboard. She could feel not just Victoria's stare now, but the attention of other passengers. The cabin had gone quieter. That particular kind of quiet that precedes conflict. She took a slow breath, highlighted one more sentence in purple, then looked up and met Victoria's gaze directly. She didn't say anything. Didn't smile this time. Just looked. Her expression was calm, composed, and utterly unyielding. It said, "I see you. I know what you're doing, and I'm not going anywhere." Victoria's nostrils flared. This girl, this child, had the audacity to stare back, to meet her eyes as an equal. The presumption of it was staggering. Simone held her gaze for exactly 3 seconds, long enough to make her point short enough to avoid direct confrontation, then returned to her reading. The dismissal was complete, and it enraged Victoria beyond measure. Victoria set down her newspaper with exaggerated care. She raised her hand, catching Jordan's attention as he passed through the cabin, checking on passengers. "Excuse me." Her voice carried clearly through the cabin. Several passengers looked up. "Is this cabin full? I was under the impression that seat 2D would remain empty." Jordan checked his tablet quickly. "We're at capacity in first class today, ma'am. Is there something specific you need know?" Victoria's voice had taken on that particular tone, the one that wealthy people use when they want to complain without being seen as complaining. "I'm just surprised at the mix of passengers today." The word mix hung in the air like smoke. Simone's fingers stopped moving on her keyboard. She didn't look up, didn't turn around, but every muscle in her body had gone tense. Jordan's professional smile tightened almost imperceptibly. He'd heard that word used that way before. He knew exactly what it meant. "All of our first-class passengers are valued guests, ma'am," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Is there anything I can get for you to make your flight more comfortable?" "Yes," Victoria said. "You can ensure that the passengers in this cabin meet appropriate standards." Daniel's phone was in his hand, now camera app open but not yet recording. Not yet. But soon. "I assure you, ma'am, every passenger in this cabin has a valid first-class ticket and has been properly checked in." "Of course." Victoria picked up her champagne glass, took a deliberate sip. "I simply have certain expectations for this cabin. Expectations of decorum, of appropriateness, of passengers who understand the privilege of flying first class." She said it to Jordan, but she was looking past him toward Simone's seat. Jordan stood very still. He'd been trained for difficult passengers, for medical emergencies, for evacuations. But this particular situation, this brewing act of discrimination happening in real time, wasn't something the training manual covered adequately. "I understand, ma'am. If you need anything during the flight, please don't hesitate to call." He moved away before his professional facade cracked completely. Simone sat frozen in her seat. Her case brief glowed on her laptop screen, but she wasn't seeing the words anymore. She was seeing her mother's face, hearing her mother's voice from a conversation years ago. "Baby, there will be people who look at you and decide you don't belong. Not because of anything you've done, but because of who you are. You can't control their prejudice. You can only control your response." Simone had asked, "What should my response be?" Her mother had smiled, sad and proud at the same time. "Dignity. Always dignity. Let them show the world who they are. You just be who you are." Simone took a breath, straightened her shoulders, and returned to her reading. She reached for her purple highlighter like it was a talisman. 5 minutes passed. The cabin continued to fill with the remaining passengers. Carlos Mendoza in 6A had noticed the tension and was watching carefully. A couple in seats 7C and 7D, elderly white, clearly uncomfortable with what they were witnessing, whispered to each other. The seat next to Simone remained empty. 3F. The last empty seat in first class. Victoria couldn't stand it anymore. The silence. The waiting. The fact that this girl was sitting there so calmly, so confidently reading her laptop like she had every right to be there. And that humming had started again, barely audible, but there. Victoria physically turned in her seat, twisting her body so she faced directly toward Simone. "Excuse me." Simone looked up slowly. She pulled her headphones down around her neck. The humming stopped. Yes, Victoria's smile was sharp as glass. "Are you certain you're in the right seat?" "Yes." Simone's voice was steady. "Seat 3J. Would you like to see my boarding pass?" "That won't be necessary." Victoria's tone suggested it absolutely was necessary. "You just seem rather young to be flying first class." Daniel hit record on his phone. He angled it carefully so the screen wasn't visible, but the camera had a clear view of both Victoria and Simone. "I'm 22, Simone said. Her voice remained calm, but something had shifted. She was done being polite. "Is there an age requirement for first class that I'm not aware of?" "No, but there are standards." Victoria gestured vaguely toward Simone's hoodie. "And you're dressed rather casually for this cabin." Simone let the silence stretch for a beat. 2 beats. She set down her purple highlighter with deliberate care. She wanted Victoria to hear her own words to recognize what she was actually saying. "I'm wearing a Stanford Law hoodie," Simone said finally, each word precisely delivered. "From the law school I attend, where I'm on law review, where I'm in the top 10% of my class. Is that casual enough to concern you, Ms. Ashford?" "Victoria Ashford." The name came out automatically before Victoria realized she'd just identified herself. "Miss Ashford." Simone nodded slowly. "I'm going to ask you a very direct question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer." Victoria's eyebrows rose. "The audacity, if I were a white girl in a Stanford hoodie." Simone continued, her voice quiet, but carrying through the cabin that had gone completely silent. "Would you be asking me these questions?" The cabin held its breath. Victoria's face flushed. "This has nothing to do with—" "Finish that sentence." Simone's voice cut through. "Please, I want to hear you finish that sentence. Everyone here wants to hear you finish it." Victoria looked around and realized with dawning horror that every passenger in first class was watching. The elderly couple in row 7, the businessman in 6A, the woman in 5B who had her phone out, the man in 4A who was definitely recording. Jordan had moved to the galley but was watching his hand on the phone that would connect him to the captain. "I don't have to explain myself to you," Victoria said, but her voice had lost some of its certainty. "No," Simone agreed. "You don't. But you've already explained yourself perfectly clearly." She returned to her laptop, picked up her purple highlighter, and put her headphones back on. The dismissal was absolute. And Victoria snapped. Victoria stood up. The motion was abrupt, aggressive. Her champagne glass wobbled on the tray table but didn't fall. "Jordan." Her voice was sharp with authority. "I need to speak with you. Now." Jordan moved forward, his gut churning. "Yes, ma'am. How can I help you? I'd like to file a formal complaint." Victoria was speaking loudly now, making sure her words carried. "This passenger," she gestured toward Simone without looking at her directly, "is making me extremely uncomfortable." The cabin went from silent to dead quiet. Simone closed her laptop very slowly, very deliberately. She pulled off her headphones and set them on the tray table. Then she stood up to face Victoria. "Ma'am," Simone said, and her voice was steady as stone. "I need you to be very, very clear about what you're saying right now." Victoria turned to face her fully. They were roughly the same height, but Victoria's heels gave her an extra 2 inches. She used them. "I'm saying that you don't fit the profile of typical first-class passengers." Victoria announced. I'm concerned about security, about fraud, about the possibility that you're occupying a seat you have no right to occupy. I'm concerned about standards. Ashley Cooper's hands were shaking as she held her phone up recording. She'd never seen anything like this. Never seen someone say these things so openly, so brazenly. Carlos Mendoza had his phone out too. So did the elderly man in 7C, his face pale with shock. Simone stood very still. When she spoke, her voice carried through the cabin with the kind of authority that made several passengers sit up straighter. I'm going to ask you one more time. I want you to think about your answer. I want you to think about the fact that there are multiple people recording this right now. I want you to think about what you're actually saying. Victoria's chin lifted. I know exactly what I'm saying. Good. Simone's eyes didn't waver. Then say it clearly. If I were white, would you be concerned about my security risk? Silence. If I were white, would you be worried about fraud? Silence. If I were white wearing this exact same hoodie sitting in this exact same seat with this exact same purple highlighter, would you be demanding to see my credentials? Victoria's mouth opened. Closed. Opened again. Answer the question, Simone said quietly. Victoria stood up. She was done with subtlety. I am saying that I don't believe you belong in this cabin. I am saying that I want her credentials verified, Jordan. I want her ID checked. I want confirmation that her ticket is legitimate. And if it's not, and I suspect it's not, I want her removed before we push back from the gate. The cabin was a vacuum. No one breathed. Jordan looked at Simone. His eyes said, I'm so sorry. His mouth said, Ma'am, if you could please show me your... No. Simone's voice cut through. One word. Absolute. No, Victoria's voice pitched up. You're refusing to show identification. I'm refusing to participate in racial profiling. Simone stood up to her full height. I checked in. I showed my credentials at the lounge. I showed them at the gate. I am in my assigned seat, and I am not showing you anything. Then I want her off this plane. Victoria's voice cracked like a whip. Jordan, call security. Call the gate agent. I am a concierge key member. I am executive platinum, and I am telling you that this passenger is... Is what? The voice came from the aircraft door. Every head turned. Standing in the entryway, briefcase in one hand and boarding pass in the other, was a black woman in her late 50s. She wore a simple navy blazer and carried herself with the kind of authority that didn't need announcement. But Victoria, in her rage, didn't register it. Finally, Victoria spun toward the newcomer. Are you with security because this young woman is... my daughter? The two words detonated in the cabin. Justice Nicole Bennett walked down the aisle of the first-class cabin with the measured pace of someone who'd spent 3 decades entering courtrooms where billions of dollars and fundamental rights hung in the balance. She'd argued before the Supreme Court 17 times as an attorney. She'd sat on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals for 8 years. She'd been appointed to the Supreme Court of the United States 6 years ago, becoming one of the most respected jurists in the nation. She knew how to command a room without raising her voice. She reached row 3 and placed her briefcase in the overhead bin with practiced ease. Then she settled into seat 3F, the aisle seat directly next to her daughter, and buckled her seatbelt. She still hadn't looked directly at Victoria. She accepted a glass of water from Jordan, whose hands were visibly shaking as he held out the cup. Thank you, Jordan. It's good to see you again. You've flown with us before, Your Honor. Jordan's voice came out higher than normal. Many times. You gave excellent service on the D.C. to San Francisco route last spring. I remember you helped an elderly passenger who was having trouble with her medication. Very compassionate. Jordan blinked. A Supreme Court justice remembered him by name. Remembered a specific act of kindness from 6 months ago. Thank you, Your Honor. That's very kind of you to remember. Justice Bennett finally turned her gaze to Victoria, who stood frozen in the aisle, her face cycling rapidly through expressions: confusion, dawning, recognition, horror, and desperate calculation. "Now then," Justice Bennett said, her voice conversational but carrying absolute authority, "you had some concerns about my daughter's presence on this flight. Why don't you articulate them for me, clearly and specifically?" Jordan backed away slowly, his mind racing. He needed to call the captain. No, first he needed to call Lucia at the gate, or maybe the flight service manager. Someone needed to know that Justice Nicole Bennett was on this aircraft, and that a passenger had just spent 10 minutes publicly harassing her daughter. This was going to be in reports. This was going to be reviewed. This was going to be everywhere. He moved to the galley and picked up the phone with shaking hands. "Lucia, it's Jordan. We have I don't even know what to call this. A situation." "What kind of situation?" "The passenger in 3J. Her mother just boarded. It's Justice Nicole Bennett, the Supreme Court Justice." Silence on the other end. Then, "Oh no." "Yeah. And the passenger in 2A has been harassing her for the past 15 minutes. Publicly. Multiple passengers are recording it. Please tell me you're joking." "I wish I was." Daniel Rodriguez lowered his phone slightly, his eyes wide. He'd recorded the entire interaction. He'd captured Victoria pointing at Simone, making her demands, raising her voice. He'd captured the moment Justice Bennett had entered the cabin. And now he was sitting 3 feet away from one of the most powerful women in America, while she calmly dismantled someone who'd made a catastrophic error in judgment. He leaned toward the passenger next to him, a younger man in a business suit who'd been working on his laptop, and whispered, "That's Justice Nicole Bennett." "Who?" "Supreme Court. One of the 9 justices who interpret the Constitution. She's been on the court for 6 years, before that 9th Circuit. She's brilliant. And that woman just spent 15 minutes racially profiling her daughter." The businessman's eyes went wide. Oh, shit. Ashley Cooper in 5B was frantically Googling on her phone, pulling up Justice Bennett's official Supreme Court photo. Same face, same composed expression, same aura of quiet authority. She showed her screen to the passenger across the aisle from her, who whispered, "Is that really her?" "Yes." And I recorded the whole thing. Everything that woman said. Carlos Mendoza in 6A didn't need to Google. He'd argued a case before the Supreme Court 2 years ago, a complex patent dispute that had gone all the way to the highest court. He'd stood at that podium in the magnificent courtroom looking up at 9 justices in their black robes. Justice Bennett had asked him 17 questions during his 30-minute argument. She'd dissected his reasoning, challenged his precedents, and ultimately voted in his favor in a 6-3 decision. He remembered every moment of that day, the brilliance of her questions, the fairness of her judgment, and now he was watching her defend her daughter from racial profiling on a commercial flight. He pulled out his phone and texted his wife. "You won't believe who's on my flight, or what I just witnessed." The elderly couple in 7C and 7D, retired teachers named Margaret and Paul, held hands and watched in silent horror. Margaret had tears in her eyes. That poor girl, she whispered to her husband. That beautiful, accomplished young woman, and that horrible woman just... Paul squeezed her hand. "I know. We're witnesses now. We saw it happen." Victoria had remained standing in the aisle, paralyzed by the recognition of who she was dealing with. Her mind raced through calculations, legal exposure, professional consequences, the fact that this woman was a Supreme Court justice and could destroy her career with a phone call. But Victoria's pride, her lifelong certainty that she was right, that she belonged in spaces like this while others wouldn't let her back down completely. "Your Honor," she started, her voice taking on a conciliatory tone that hadn't been there before. "I apologize if there was any misunderstanding. I was simply expressing concern about security protocols. In these times, we all have to be vigilant. Stop talking." Justice Bennett's voice was quiet, but the 2 words carried the weight of 30 years of judicial authority. Victoria stopped. "You're going to sit down," Justice Bennett continued, still not raising her voice above conversational level. You're going to remain silent. And when we land in Los Angeles, you're going to be met by airport security and airline management. Do you understand? Victoria's face went white. That's not... I didn't... I said, do you understand? Victoria nodded mutely and sank into her seat. Justice Bennett pulled out her phone, tapped it twice, and the screen illuminated. She held it up so Victoria could see clearly. The screen showed Simone's boarding pass. Seat 3J, first class, paid in full. Concern 1, Justice Bennett said. Legitimacy of ticket. As you can see, fully paid, properly issued. Would you like to examine the confirmation number? She didn't wait for an answer. She swiped to the next screen. It showed Simone's Stanford Law Student ID official university photo. Expiration date, student number, clearly visible. Concern 2. Identity verification. This is my daughter Simone Nicole Bennett, age 22, second-year law student at Stanford Law School, member of Law Review, Rhodes Scholar finalist, Constitutional Law Society president. That purple highlighter she's been using her signature since Princeton. She uses it for every brief she reads. Victoria stared at the phone like it might bite her. Justice Bennett swiped one more time. The screen showed her own official Supreme Court biography page, her photo in judicial robes, her full name and title, her appointment date. Concern 3. Justice Bennett's voice dropped into a register that could freeze nitrogen. Who we are. I am Justice Nicole Bennett of the United States Supreme Court. The woman you just spent 15 minutes publicly harassing, demanding removal from this aircraft based on her appearance is my daughter. Ms. Ashford, let me be crystal clear. My daughter doesn't need your permission to exist in spaces she's earned. Nobody does. Are these concerns thoroughly addressed? Victoria's champagne glass, forgotten on her tray table, slipped. It fell in what felt like slow motion. Crystal met floor with a sharp crack. The glass shattered into pieces. Golden liquid spread across the cabin floor in a growing puddle that no one moved to clean. The sound seemed to break the spell that had frozen everyone. 7 passengers had their phones out now, all recording. Daniel's video had been rolling for 8 minutes straight. Ashley was streaming live to her Instagram. Carlos was recording for legal documentation purposes. The elderly couple had their iPad up, capturing everything. This moment, this complete devastating dismantling of Victoria Ashford's assumptions and privilege, was being documented from 7 different angles. It would be uploaded within minutes. It would be viral within the hour. And Victoria Ashford's life as she knew it was over. Justice Bennett tucked her phone back into her jacket pocket and turned in her seat to face Victoria fully. The rest of the cabin remained frozen passengers afraid to move, afraid to miss a single word of what was about to happen. My daughter, Justice Bennett, began, her voice quiet and measured, is a second-year law student at Stanford Law School. She has maintained a 3.8 GPA while serving on Law Review and founding the school's first constitutional rights advocacy clinic. She was a Rhodes Scholar finalist. She graduated summa cum laude from Princeton with a degree in African American Studies and Political Science. She speaks 3 languages. She volunteers at a legal aid clinic every Saturday during the school year. Victoria sat rigid in her seat, unable to speak, unable to look away. She is flying home to Los Angeles for Thanksgiving break in a first-class seat that I purchased for her. I purchased it with money I earned through 30 years of practicing law and serving on the federal bench. I earned that money by graduating first in my class from Harvard Law School, by clerking for Justice Thurgood Marshall, by arguing 17 cases before the Supreme Court with a record of 14 wins, by serving 8 years on the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals before being appointed to the Supreme Court. Justice Bennett paused. Let the words settle. My daughter belongs in this cabin. In fact, I would argue she belongs here more than most, because she didn't just buy her way into this seat with a credit card. She earned the right to be here through excellence, through scholarship, through dedication to justice and the rule of law. She leaned forward slightly. You, Ms. Ashford, are in this cabin because you can afford it. That's all. You paid money. My daughter earned respect. Do you understand the difference? The question hung in the air. Victoria's mouth opened. No sound came out. I'll ask you again, Justice Bennett said. Do you understand the difference between buying access and earning respect? Yes, Victoria whispered. Her voice was barely audible. I'm not sure you do. Justice Bennett's voice remained calm, but something in it had turned to steel. Because if you understood that difference, you would not have looked at my daughter, a young woman in a Stanford law hoodie carrying case briefs, clearly studying, and decided she was a security risk. You would not have assumed she'd stolen her seat or was flying on a buddy pass. You would not have demanded she prove her right to occupy space that you deemed belonged to people like you. Justice Bennett paused again. When she spoke next, her voice was softer, but somehow that made it more devastating. I'm going to tell you something about my family, Ms. Ashford. And I want you to listen carefully. My father was a Pullman porter for 40 years. Had a law degree from Howard, he couldn't use no firm would hire a black attorney in 1958. Justice Bennett's voice was steady, but Simone heard the emotion underneath. He carried bags for passengers who called him boy even at 50 years old. Served men less intelligent than him with a smile. Saved every penny to send me to Yale. She squeezed Simone's hand. When I was appointed to the Supreme Court, he took my hand so thin by then he was dying and said, "Baby girl, you're sitting in the seat I paid for." Simone's eyes filled with tears. Not with money, with dignity. He swallowed every single day, with brilliance he couldn't use, with dreams he had to defer so I could live mine, and I'm paying for your seat with my work, and you're earning it with your excellence. She turned back to Victoria. That seat in row 3 isn't just a first-class airline seat, Ms. Ashford. It's an inheritance, paid for with generations of sacrifice, and no one, not you, not anyone, gets to question whether my daughter belongs there. Justice Bennett pulled her phone out again. She opened her email and began typing as she spoke. I'm writing an email right now to the District of Columbia Bar Association. I'm filing a formal ethics complaint against you based on the conduct I witnessed today. Public harassment, racial profiling, behavior unbecoming an attorney. Victoria's face went from white to gray. Your Honor, please. I'm not finished. Justice Bennett didn't look up from her phone. I'm also copying the managing partner of what firm did you say you were with? I didn't. Victoria's voice cracked. Ashford and Partners. Ashford and Partners. Interesting. Are you related to the managing partner? He's my uncle. I see. Justice Bennett's thumbs moved quickly over her phone screen. I'm copying your uncle then. And I'm attaching links to several videos that passengers have recorded of your behavior today. I can see at least 4 phones currently recording. I imagine those videos will be on social media within minutes. She hit send. Done. Victoria was shaking now. Your Honor, I apologize. I made a mistake. I was wrong. Please, you're not apologizing to me. Justice Bennett's voice was quiet but absolute. You're apologizing because you got caught, because you realized who I am, but you didn't know who I was when you started harassing my daughter. You didn't care. You saw a young black woman in casual clothes and decided she didn't belong. The only thing you regret is that there are consequences. She turned to Jordan, who'd been standing near the galley phone pressed to his ear, speaking quickly to someone on the ground. Jordan, what's the protocol here? Jordan moved forward, his professional mask firmly in place, but his eyes bright with something that looked like vindication. Your Honor, I've been in contact with the captain and the flight service manager. Ms. Ashford is being removed from this flight. Airport security is on their way to the aircraft now. Victoria stood up suddenly. What? No, I have to be in Los Angeles tomorrow. I have meetings. You should have thought of that, Jordan said, his voice remarkably steady, before you harassed a fellow passenger for 15 minutes. Before you demanded she be removed based solely on the color of her skin. Before you created a hostile environment in this cabin. I didn't. It wasn't about... Victoria was sputtering now, her composure completely shattered. Ma'am. Jordan's voice remained professional, but there was steel underneath. Multiple passengers have filed complaints. I've filed a report. The captain has reviewed the situation. You're being removed from this aircraft. 2 airport security officers appeared at the door of the aircraft. They were professional, calm, clearly briefed on the situation before they'd boarded. Ms. Victoria Ashford, one of them asked. Victoria looked around the cabin wildly, as if searching for someone to save her. She saw only the faces of passengers watching her with expressions ranging from satisfaction to pity to outright disgust. This is ridiculous, she said, but her voice had lost all its earlier authority. I'm a concierge key member. I'm Diamond Elite. You can't just... Those statuses were revoked 7 minutes ago, ma'am, the security officer said, not unkindly. American Airlines has terminated your membership in all loyalty programs effective immediately. You're also banned from flying American Airlines for life. The words landed like physical blows. You need to gather your belongings and come with us, the other officer said. Victoria stood frozen for a moment. Then, with shaking hands, she reached into the overhead bin and pulled out her carry-on. She grabbed her briefcase from under the seat in front of her. Her Wall Street Journal, forgotten, slipped to the floor. As she turned toward the front of the cabin, she had to pass Justice Bennett's seat. Justice Bennett looked up at her, held her gaze. Ms. Ashford Victoria stopped. She couldn't help herself. The case my daughter is reading right now, Brown v. Board of Education. Do you know what it says? Victoria said nothing. It says that separate is inherently unequal. That you cannot determine someone's worth, someone's right to occupy a space based on the color of their skin. It's been 71 years since that decision was handed down, and yet here you are proving we still need to teach that lesson. The security officers waited patiently. I hope Justice Bennett, said, her voice soft with something that might have been genuine sadness, that you learn it this time. Victoria Ashford walked off Flight 447 to absolute silence. The silence held for 5 long seconds after she disappeared down the jet bridge. Then, someone in row 8 started clapping. The sound was hesitant at first, just one person's hands coming together. But it spread like wildfire. Row 7 joined in. Then row 6. Then row 5. The entire first-class cabin erupted in applause. Some passengers were standing. Some had tears streaming down their faces. The elderly woman in 7C was openly weeping her husband's arm around her shoulders. Daniel Rodriguez was still recording, capturing the ovation. Ashley Cooper had stopped crying long enough to join the applause. Carlos Mendoza stood up and gave Justice Bennett a small bow of respect. Justice Bennett waved her hand gently, asking them to stop. Please, that's not necessary. But the applause continued for another 30 seconds. When it finally died down, a young black man was being escorted to Victoria's now empty seat. Trevor Davis upgraded from economy, his face stunned with disbelief at his good fortune. He stopped at row 3. Justice Bennett, he said quietly, I just want to say thank you, not just for your daughter, for all of us. Justice Bennett smiled, a real warm smile that transformed her serious face. Thank you for bearing witness. All of you. She looked around the cabin. Make sure those videos stay up. People need to see this. Not for revenge. Not to destroy anyone. But for the record. So the next time someone tries to make a young person feel like they don't belong somewhere, there's evidence that this behavior has consequences. Daniel nodded. It's already backed up on 3 servers, Your Honor. Good. Jordan appeared with a glass of water for Justice Bennett and another for Simone. His hands had stopped shaking. "Can I get you anything else, Your Honor?" "No, Jordan. Thank you. You handled that situation with real grace." Jordan's eyes misted slightly. "Thank you for saying that. And I'm so sorry your daughter had to experience that." Justice Bennett looked at Simone, who'd been quiet through the entire exchange. "How are you doing, baby?" Simone took a shaky breath. "I'm okay. I think." That was intense. It was, and I'm proud of how you handled it. I wanted to scream. I wanted to cry. But you didn't. You stood your ground with dignity. Justice Bennett squeezed her daughter's hand. "That's all we can ever do." After Victoria's removal, the captain's voice came over the intercom. It was calm, professional, but everyone in the cabin could hear the underlying gravity. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Sarah Mitchell speaking from the flight deck. I want to address what just occurred in our cabin. American Airlines has a zero-tolerance policy for harassment and discrimination of any kind. The passenger who was removed violated that policy. On behalf of American Airlines and my entire crew, I apologize to all of you for the disruption. Justice Bennett Simone, we're honored to have you flying with us today." A small pause. "We're going to push back shortly. Flight time to Los Angeles is approximately 5 hours and 40 minutes. Sit back, relax, and thank you for your patience during this unusual situation." The announcement ended. Jordan moved through the cabin, checking on passengers, his professional demeanor restored, but his eyes still bright with emotion. When he reached row 3, he crouched down between Justice Bennett and Simone's seats. "Your Honor, the flight service manager asked me to personally ensure you and your daughter have everything you need for this flight. If there's anything at all, please don't hesitate to ask." "We're fine, Jordan. Really." He nodded, then lowering his voice so only they could hear. "For what it's worth, I've been a flight attendant for 8 years. I've seen things like this before, people making assumptions, being inappropriate. But I've never had the opportunity to see someone stand up the way you did." "Thank you." Justice Bennett touched his arm briefly. "You stood up, too. You called for help. You documented everything. Don't discount your role in this." As Flight 447 pushed back from the gate and began its taxi toward the runway, passengers with Wi-Fi were already uploading videos. Daniel Rodriguez's video went up first. He titled it, "Supreme Court Justice Defends Daughter from Racist Passenger Full Video." Within 3 minutes of uploading it, had 5,000 views. Within 5 minutes, 15,000. By the time the plane was wheels up climbing through the clouds toward cruising altitude, his video had 127,000 views. Ashley Cooper was streaming live to her Instagram. Her feed showed her face still tear-stained as she provided commentary. "I just witnessed something I'll never forget. A woman tried to have a young black girl removed from first class just for existing. Turns out that girl's mother is a Supreme Court justice. Justice was served. Literally. Her live stream had 400 viewers and climbing. Carlos Mendoza sent his video to a group chat of attorneys he knew from patent law circles. One of them was a legal reporter for Reuters. Within 10 minutes, Reuters was drafting a news alert. The elderly couple, Margaret and Paul, had uploaded their iPad video to their Facebook page with a caption. "Witnessed something important today. This is what prejudice looks like. This is what standing up to it looks like. Share widely." By the time Flight 447 reached cruising altitude, 7 separate videos from 7 different angles were circulating online. Twitter users had started creating hashtags. Justice for Simone Victoria. Ashford, first class. Racism, Nicole. Bennett flight. Justice. The videos were being shared, retweeted, reposted. They were jumping from platform to platform, from Twitter to Facebook, to Reddit, to Instagram, to TikTok. News outlets were starting to pick them up. CNN's breaking news alert. Supreme Court justice involved in airline incident after passenger harasses her daughter. Washington Post's alert. Caught on video. Attorney demands removal of black passenger from first class, not realizing passenger's mother is Supreme Court justice. The New York Times. Justice Nicole Bennett confronts passenger who racially profiled her daughter on American Airlines flight. Legal Times. D.C. Attorney Victoria Ashford faces ethics complaint after viral airline incident. Trevor Davis, the medical resident who'd been upgraded to Victoria's seat, was scrolling through Twitter on his phone. He turned to the passenger next to him, a woman in her 40s who'd witnessed everything. "This is already everywhere," he said, showing her his screen. "The video has 800,000 views." The woman looked. "Good. Maybe something will actually change. You think if enough people see it, if there are real consequences. Maybe." In row 6, Carlos was on a call with his wife, speaking quietly in Spanish. "Sí, mi amor. La juez Bennett. En serio. Acabo de verlo todo, fue increíble. No la otra mujer fue removida del vuelo. Sí hay videos por todos lados." In row Fink, Ashley was reading comments on her Instagram live stream aloud to her seatmate. "This woman is my hero." Finally, someone stood up. "I've been in that girl's position so many times. That lawyer should be disbarred. This is what privilege looks like when it gets checked." In the American Airlines corporate headquarters in Fort Worth, Texas, emergency meetings were being called. Social media monitoring teams had flagged the videos within minutes of their appearance. By the time Flight 447 was at 35,000 feet, executives were watching the videos with growing horror. The VP of Customer Experience called the CEO directly. "Sir, we have a major situation developing. I'm watching the videos now." The passenger who was removed. Victoria Ashford, she's an attorney. The passenger she harassed is Simone Bennett, daughter of Supreme Court Justice Nicole Bennett. Justice Bennett was on the aircraft. This is on 7 different videos. Combined views are already over 2 million and climbing. Silence on the line. "What's our response?" the VP asked. "Everything by the book. Lifetime ban for Ashford already done. Full investigation. Public statement within the hour. And I want to personally call Justice Bennett when she lands. Sir, the D.C. Bar Association has already received an ethics complaint, filed by Justice Bennett herself. Our legal team is being copied on everything, as they should be. This is exactly what our zero-tolerance policy exists for. We need to be unequivocal, no wiggle room. This behavior is unacceptable, and we don't want passengers like Victoria Ashford on our aircraft ever again." Within 30 minutes, American Airlines' official Twitter account posted, "American Airlines has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination of any kind. The passenger in today's incident has been permanently banned from all American flights. We apologize to Justice Bennett and her daughter for their experience. A full investigation is underway." The tweet was seen by 400,000 people in the first 15 minutes. Victoria Ashford sat in an airport security office, her carry-on at her feet, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold her phone. She'd been escorted off the aircraft through the jet bridge and into this windowless room with gray walls and fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly ill. The security officers had been professional but firm. She wasn't in trouble, they'd explained. She wasn't being arrested. But she'd been removed from a flight and banned from the airline, so they needed to process some paperwork. Her phone had been buzzing non-stop for the past 20 minutes. She finally looked at the screen. 47 missed calls, 129 text messages, 217 unread emails. She opened her email first with trembling fingers. The first one was from her uncle Richard Ashford, managing partner of Ashford & Partners. The subject line read, "Call me immediately." The second was from the firm's general counsel. "Victoria, we need to speak urgently about a video that's circulating online." The third was from HR. "Please contact the office as soon as possible regarding a personnel matter." She scrolled down. More emails from partners at the firm, from colleagues, from clients. and then one that made her stomach drop. DC Bar Association Ethics Complaint. Filed, urgent response required. With shaking hands, she opened her text messages. Her husband. What the hell did you do? Her sister. Victoria. You're on Twitter. It's bad. Her college roommate. Is this really you in this video? A lawyer friend. Please tell me this isn't you. Please. Victoria opened Twitter with a sense of creeping dread. Her name was trending. Victoria Ashford had 47,000 tweets. She clicked on it. The first tweet showed a screenshot from Daniel's video, her face mid-rant, finger pointing at Simone. The caption: Meet Victoria Ashford, the racist lawyer who tried to kick a Stanford law student out of first class because she was black. Turns out the student's mom is a Supreme Court justice. Thread. Victoria scrolled through her mentions. Hundreds of them. Thousands. This woman should be disbarred. Someone find her firm. No one should hire her. Look at that face. Pure entitlement. She really thought she could get away with this. Imagine being so confidently racist in 2024. That Supreme Court justice handled this with more grace than I could have. She found Daniel's video and pressed play. For the first time, she watched herself from an outsider's perspective. She watched herself point at Simone, heard herself say standards and mix of passengers, watched herself demand credentials, insist on removal, refuse to back down, saw the moment Justice Bennett entered the frame, watched her own face cycle through recognition and horror. The video had 2.3 million views now. 2,300,000 people had watched her destroy herself. She couldn't breathe. A security officer knocked on the door. Ms. Ashford. You're free to leave, but you'll need to book a new flight with a different airline. American Airlines has confirmed you're banned from all future flights. Victoria nodded mutely. Do you need help getting to another terminal? No. I'll manage. She gathered her bags and walked out of the security office into the main terminal of Dulles International Airport. A woman walking past did a double take, pulled out her phone, started recording. That's her, the woman said to her companion. That's the woman from the video. Victoria put her head down and walked faster. Another person recognized her. Hey, you're that racist lawyer. Victoria practically ran toward the exit, tears streaming down her face, the weight of public recognition crushing her like a physical force. Her phone buzzed again. Another call from her uncle. This time she answered. Richard. What the hell were you thinking? His voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Do you have any idea what you've done? Any idea at all? I made a mistake. A mistake. A mistake. Victoria. You racially profiled the daughter of a Supreme Court justice on video. 7 different videos. They've been viewed millions of times. CNN is running the story, The Washington Post. Every major news outlet, I didn't know who she was. That's the problem. Richard was shouting now. You didn't know who she was, so you assumed she didn't belong. You assumed she was a fraud. And you did it so publicly, so arrogantly, that now our entire firm is associated with your behavior. Victoria sank onto a bench in the terminal, no longer caring who saw her crying. Richard, please? The executive committee is meeting in 20 minutes. I'm telling you this as family, not as managing partner. You need to call a lawyer, not one from our firm. Someone independent. Because the DC bar complaint is just the beginning. The line went dead. Victoria sat on the bench surrounded by travelers rushing to catch flights, living their normal lives while hers collapsed around her. And for the first time, a small crack appeared in her certainty. A whisper of doubt. Had she been wrong? Not just about who Simone was, but about the assumptions that had led her to make that judgment in the first place. The thought was too painful to examine fully. She pushed it away and pulled up the video again, watching herself one more time, still trying to find a way to justify what everyone could see. The cabin of Flight 447 had settled into an unusual quiet. It wasn't the normal quiet of passengers reading or watching movies or sleeping. It was the quiet of people processing something significant, something they knew they'd remember for the rest of their lives. Trevor Davis sat in Seat 2A, Victoria's former seat, and couldn't quite believe his luck. 20 minutes ago, he'd been in 34C, a middle seat in economy, preparing himself for 6 hours of discomfort. He was flying to LA for a medical conference, his first time presenting research, and he'd budgeted carefully to afford even the economy ticket. Now he sat in first class in a pod that transformed into a fully flat bed with more legroom than he'd ever experienced on a plane. Jordan had brought him champagne. Real champagne in a crystal glass. But he couldn't enjoy it. Not really. Not after what he'd witnessed. He turned in his seat and looked back toward row 3, where Justice Bennett and Simone sat together. The Justice was working on her laptop, probably writing an opinion or reviewing a brief. Simone had her headphones on, had returned to her case brief as if nothing had happened, her purple highlighter moving across the page. But Trevor saw the way Simone's hand shook slightly as she highlighted text. The way she had to stop every few minutes and take a breath. The way her mother would reach over and squeeze her hand without looking away from her own work. Ashley Cooper in 5B couldn't stop checking her phone. Her Instagram live stream had ended, but the video was still available. It had been viewed 89,000 times. The comments kept coming. "Thank you for documenting this. Your hands were shaking, but you kept recording. That took courage. White people need to witness this stuff, need to see it and speak up. You were crying in the video. Same. This hit hard." Ashley had never been involved in something that felt this important. She worked in consulting, spent her days optimizing supply chains and reducing costs. Important work maybe, but not meaningful in the way this felt meaningful. She'd witnessed injustice. She'd documented it. And it was making a difference. Carlos Mendoza in 6A was on his laptop reading news coverage of the incident that was already being published. Reporters were fast. They'd taken the viral videos and had articles online within an hour. He read quotes from civil rights organizations praising Justice Bennett's response, legal experts discussing the ethics complaint, aviation experts talking about airline policies on passenger removal, and quotes from witnesses. His name had been mentioned in one article. Someone had identified him from his video and contacted him for comment. "I've argued cases before the Supreme Court," he'd told the reporter. "I've stood at that podium and answered Justice Bennett's questions. She is brilliant, fair, and one of the finest legal minds in the country. What I witnessed today was both her humanity and her strength. She defended her daughter with dignity and made it clear that discrimination has consequences." The quote was already being shared on legal Twitter. When the seatbelt sign dinged off and the plane reached cruising altitude, Justice Bennett closed her laptop and turned to her daughter. "You okay, baby?" Simone pulled off her headphones. She'd been staring at the same paragraph of her case brief for 15 minutes without processing a single word. Her purple highlighter lay uncapped on the tray table. "I think so," she said. Her voice was steady, but her mother could hear the tremor underneath. "I don't know. That was intense. That's one word for it." Simone set her laptop aside. "I wanted to yell. I wanted to tell her everything I was thinking. I wanted to make her understand how it feels to have someone look at you like you're a problem just for existing." Justice Bennett took her daughter's hand. "But you didn't. You stood your ground with more grace than I had at your age, than most people have at any age. I was terrified. I know. And then you walked on the plane and I just..." Simone's voice cracked. I felt like I could finally breathe again. Justice Bennett pulled her daughter into a hug, awkward in the airplane seats but necessary. "I'm sorry you had to go through that. I'm sorry that in 2024 you still have to prove you belong in spaces like this." They sat like that for a moment, mother holding daughter while the aircraft carried them westward across the country. When they separated, Simone wiped her eyes. "I read the comments on some of the videos. People are being really supportive, but there are also people saying I should have just shown my ID, that it would have been easier to just prove I had a right to be there." Justice Bennett's jaw tightened. That's the response that allows discrimination to continue. The burden shouldn't be on you to prove you belong. The burden should be on people not to make assumptions based on skin color. "I know, but part of me wonders if I'd just shown her my boarding pass right away, would it have de-escalated? Maybe. Or maybe she would have found another reason to question you. Maybe she would have said the pass was stolen or fraudulent. You can't logic your way out of someone else's prejudice, baby. You can only stand firm in your right to exist." Simone nodded slowly. She picked up her purple highlighter and turned it over in her fingers. "Why does it still hurt, though, even after she was removed? Even after everyone supported me? Why does it still hurt?" Justice Bennett's expression softened. "Because it shouldn't have happened in the first place. Because you shouldn't have to win a confrontation just to sit in a seat you paid for. Because the victory feels hollow when you wanted to just be left alone to read your case brief and use your purple highlighter in peace." "Yeah," Simone whispered. "Exactly that." Justice Bennett was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I want to tell you something about your grandfather." Simone turned to face her mother fully. "My father was a Pullman porter for 40 years. Had a law degree from Howard, he couldn't use no firm would hire a black attorney in 1958. Justice Bennett's voice was steady, but Simone heard the emotion underneath. He carried bags for passengers who called him boy even at 50 years old. Served men less intelligent than him with a smile. Saved every penny to send me to Yale. She squeezed Simone's hand. "When I was appointed to the Supreme Court, he took my hand so thin by then he was dying and said, 'Baby girl, you're sitting in the seat I paid for.'" Simone's eyes filled with tears. Not with money. With dignity he swallowed every single day. With brilliance he couldn't use. With dreams he had to defer so I could live mine. And I'm paying for your seat with my work. And you're earning it with your excellence." Simone wiped her eyes. "I won't let him down. Or you. You couldn't if you tried. You are exactly who you're supposed to be, and you belong everywhere you choose to be." They sat together for a while longer, hands clasped, purple highlighter resting on the tray table like a small symbol of perseverance. Outside the window, America scrolled by beneath them, a country still grappling with the same questions of who belongs and who decides. But in seat 3J, Simone Bennett belonged absolutely, and the entire cabin had witnessed what happened when someone tried to challenge that truth. 2 hours into the flight, passengers with Wi-Fi were tracking the viral spread in real time. Daniel Rodriguez refreshed his Twitter notifications and felt his phone actually lag from the volume. His video had been retweeted 47,000 times. Quote, tweeted another 12,000 times. The view count was at 4.2 million and climbing by thousands every few seconds. He scrolled through the responses. "This is the most important video you'll see today. Everyone needs to watch this. Everyone. The way Justice Bennett handled this with such dignity while that woman fell apart. I've watched this 5 times and I'm still not over it. Someone please tell me that woman lost her job." Daniel opened his email and found 23 interview requests. CNN, MSNBC, ABC News, local stations, podcasts, legal blogs. Everyone wanted to talk to him about what he'd witnessed. He looked back toward row 3, where Justice Bennett and Simone were talking quietly, and made a decision. He opened a new email and began typing a response to the media requests. "I'm willing to discuss what I witnessed, but only on condition that the focus remains on the broader issue of racial profiling and discrimination, not on sensationalizing the individuals involved. Justice Bennett and her daughter deserve privacy to process this experience. He hit send on identical emails to all 23 requests. Ashley's phone was blowing up too. Her Instagram had gained 15,000 followers in 2 hours. Her live stream video had been screen recorded and uploaded to YouTube, where it had 890,000 views. People were tagging her in posts, sharing her content, calling her brave. But she was reading the comments with growing discomfort. Finally, a white woman who stood up. "This is what being an ally looks like. Thank you for using your privilege." Ashley opened her notes app and started writing. When she was satisfied, she posted to Instagram. "I've been getting a lot of praise for recording what happened today, but I need to be clear. I'm not a hero. I didn't do anything except hold up a phone. Simone Bennett is the one who stood her ground with grace. Justice Bennett is the one who addressed injustice with authority and dignity. I was a witness. That's all. And being a witness is the bare minimum. If you're praising me for doing the bare minimum while a black woman and her daughter faced discrimination, that should tell you something about how low our standards are." She posted it and watched it spread almost as fast as her original video. Carlos Mendoza had been in contact with colleagues from the legal community. Group chats were exploding with discussion of the ethics complaint of Victoria Ashford's conduct of the precedent this might set. One colleague sent him a link to Victoria Ashford's LinkedIn profile. Carlos clicked it. The profile was still active, but in the past hour her connection count had dropped from 2,400 to 1,100 and was falling by the minute. People were publicly disconnecting from her. Her profile picture showed her in professional attire, smiling confidently at the camera. The disconnect between that confident smile and the woman he'd watched being escorted off the plane was jarring. In the comments section of articles about the incident, Carlos saw legal professionals weighing in. "I'm an attorney in D.C. I've worked opposite Victoria Ashford on cases. This behavior doesn't surprise me. Anyone who thinks this is out of character doesn't know her. Ask associates at her firm about her leadership style." The quiet part said loud. At 35,000 feet, the consequences were cascading on the ground below. The D.C. Bar Association had assigned the ethics complaint to an investigator within 30 minutes of receiving Justice Bennett's email. The investigator had pulled Victoria Ashford's file and discovered something interesting. This wasn't the first complaint filed against her. There were 3 previous complaints, all dismissed or resolved quietly, all involving allegations of discriminatory behavior toward junior associates and opposing counsel. A pattern was emerging. The investigator sent an email to the bar's ethics committee. "This case warrants full investigation and potential public hearing. Multiple videos. Supreme Court Justice as complainant, prior complaints on file. Recommend priority handling." At Ashford and Partners, the Emergency Executive Committee meeting was in full session. Richard Ashford sat at the head of the conference table, looking older than his 65 years. "I've reviewed the videos," he said. "All 7 of them, from every angle. There's no ambiguity here. Victoria engaged in blatant racial profiling. She did it publicly. She did it aggressively. And she did it to the daughter of a Supreme Court justice. What are our options?" asked another partner. "Limited. We can terminate her partnership immediately and issue a public statement condemning her behavior, or we can wait for the D.C. Bar investigation and likely face association with her conduct for weeks or months while it plays out. She's your niece," someone pointed out. "Which makes this harder personally but doesn't change the professional calculus. We have a DOT case before the Supreme Court in 6 weeks. Justice Bennett will be on that panel. If we don't act decisively, we risk every client we represent before her court. We risk our reputation. We risk—" His phone buzzed. He glanced at it and his face went pale. "What?" asked the general counsel. "We've received termination notices from 3 major clients in the past hour, all citing association with Victoria Ashford as the reason." The room went silent. "Motion to terminate Victoria Ashford's partnership, effective immediately," said the general counsel. "Second," said another partner. "All in favor." Every hand in the room went up. Richard nodded, his face grim. "Someone call her. Tell her to expect termination papers within 24 hours and contact PR. We need a statement ready to go." On Twitter, Victoria Ashford had been trending for 3 hours, but the conversation was evolving beyond just the incident itself. People were sharing their own experiences. "This happened to me in a hotel lobby. The manager called security because she assumed I'd stolen the credit card I was using to check in. My own credit card. I was removed from a department store because an employee decided I looked suspicious. I was shopping for my daughter's birthday present. I've been flying first class for work for 15 years. The number of times I've been asked to show my boarding pass again after I'm already seated is countless. It never happens to my white colleagues. My son is a doctor. He was on a flight when someone had a medical emergency. When he offered to help, the flight attendant asked if he was really a doctor." The stories poured in. Thousands of them. The Victoria Ashford incident had become a flashpoint for a much larger conversation about everyday discrimination, about assumptions made based on appearance, about who is believed to belong in what spaces. Justice for Simone was trending too, but with a different tone. Simone Bennett handled that with more grace than I could have. Her composure was incredible. She's on law review at Stanford. Rhodes Scholar finalist. And none of that should matter. She belongs there because she's a person who bought a ticket. The fact that we had to find out her credentials to justify her presence is part of the problem. She didn't owe that woman her resume. Legal Twitter was having its own parallel conversation. Ethics complaint was filed. DC Bar doesn't mess around. Ashford is looking at potential suspension. I've argued before Justice Bennett. She is fair, brilliant, and one of the finest jurists on the bench. This woman messed with the wrong family. The formal citation of Rules 8.4d and G in the complaint is significant. Those are serious violations. Every law student in the country is going to study this case in professional responsibility. By the time Flight 447 was 3 hours from landing, the incident had been covered by every major news outlet, discussed on morning shows, analyzed by legal experts, and had become one of the top news stories of the day. Victoria Ashford's name had been searched on Google over 500,000 times. Justice Nicole Bennett's name had been searched 1.2 million times. And Simone Bennett, who just wanted to go home for Thanksgiving and study for her finals, was now known to millions of people as the young woman who'd stood her ground with dignity in the face of discrimination. She didn't want to be famous. She didn't want to be a symbol. But sometimes history chooses you, rather than the other way around. Flight 447 touched down at Los Angeles International Airport at 4:47 p.m. Pacific Time, 17 minutes ahead of schedule. As the plane taxied toward the gate, passengers began gathering their belongings, but the energy in the cabin was different from a normal flight. People were still processing what they'd witnessed, still checking their phones and seeing the viral spread of something they'd been part of, still glancing toward row 3, where Justice Bennett and Simone sat quietly waiting for the chaos of deplaning to pass. Jordan appeared at their row. "Your Honor, we've arranged for you and your daughter to deplane through a private exit if you'd prefer. There's some media presence at the terminal." Justice Bennett looked at Simone. "What do you think baby Simone was exhausted?" The adrenaline had worn off somewhere over Arizona, leaving her feeling hollowed out and fragile. The thought of walking through a terminal full of people who might recognize her, who might want to take photos or ask questions, was overwhelming. "The private exit sounds good," she said quietly. "Thank you, Jordan." "Justice," Bennett added. "We appreciate everything you did today." Jordan's eyes misted slightly. "It was an honor, Your Honor. Truly." He paused. "I've already submitted my incident report. Every detail. I want you to know that the crew stands with you completely. That means more than you know." As the cabin door opened and passengers began to deplane, Trevor Davis stopped at row 3. He'd been one of the first to stand, but he'd waited, letting others pass. Justice Bennett Simone. I just wanted to say thank you, not just for today, but for everything. I'm a medical resident. I'm in LA for my first conference presenting research, and every time I walk into a professional space, I wonder if I belong there, if people will question my credentials, after seeing how you both handled today with such grace. His voice caught. It matters. It helps. Simone stood and gave him a brief hug. Good luck with your presentation, and you belong everywhere you've earned the right to be. Don't let anyone make you doubt that. Trevor nodded, unable to speak, and continued toward the exit. Daniel Rodriguez stopped next. Your Honor, I've been contacted by several news outlets wanting to talk about what I witnessed. I wanted to make sure you're comfortable with me discussing it. I've told them all that the focus should be on the larger issues, not on sensationalizing individuals. Justice Bennett shook his hand. Thank you for being thoughtful about that. You have my permission to speak about what you witnessed. The truth needs to be told. Ashley Cooper was next, her eyes red from crying. I'm so sorry you both had to experience that. And thank you for handling it the way you did. I learned something today about what it really means to stand up. You held up your phone when others might have looked away, Simone said. That took courage. It took a phone. You're the one with courage. Carlos Mendoza approached last. Justice Bennett. I argued before you 2 years ago. Patent case, Nanotech Industries versus Stanford Research. Justice Bennett's face lit with recognition. Mr. Mendoza, of course, you presented an excellent argument, one of the better patent cases I've heard. Thank you. Your Honor, I just wanted you to know whatever happens with the ethics complaint, the D.C. bar investigation, all of it, the legal community is watching, and most of us are horrified by what we saw today. Most Justice Bennett raised an eyebrow. There are always people who make excuses, but they're being outnumbered and out-argued. The conversation is shifting. Good, it's long past time. It's long past. Finally, the cabin cleared. Jordan escorted Justice Bennett and Simone through a service door down a staircase and into a private corridor that bypassed the terminal. A car was waiting outside, but as they walked toward the exit, Simone could hear the noise from the terminal above them. Voices, shouting, the chaos of people and media and attention. Mom, it's really out there, isn't it? This is really big. Yes, baby, it's really big. I just wanted to go home and read my case brief with my purple highlighter and maybe watch Netflix. Justice Bennett pulled her daughter close as they walked. I know. But sometimes history happens whether we want it to or not. At the main terminal, news crews from 7 local stations had set up cameras. They'd been tipped off about Justice Bennett's presence on the flight and had descended on LAX within an hour of the videos going viral. Passengers from Flight 447 were being stopped as they emerged into the terminal. Did you see what happened? Can you describe the incident? What was Justice Bennett like? Daniel gave a brief statement to 3 different outlets. I witnessed a clear case of racial profiling. A passenger assumed a young black woman didn't belong in first class, based solely on her appearance. Justice Bennett addressed the situation with dignity and made it clear that discrimination has consequences. The entire cabin supported them. Ashley declined most interviews, but posted to her Instagram from the terminal. Just landed. Still processing. Simone Bennett and Justice Bennett showed us what grace under pressure looks like. I hope I never forget this. The elderly couple, Margaret and Paul, were stopped by a young reporter from a local station. We've been teachers for 40 years, Margaret said, her voice steady despite her emotion. We've seen discrimination in schools, in parent meetings, in every aspect of education. What happened on that flight was unacceptable. But the way that young woman held her ground, the way her mother stood up for her, that's what we should be talking about. Not the discrimination itself, but the resistance to it. The video clips and quotes were being fed into news cycles. By evening, the incident would be discussed on every major news program. Legal experts would analyze the ethics complaint. Social psychologists would discuss implicit bias. Aviation experts would talk about airline policies. But in a private car driving away from LAX toward Pacific Palisades, Justice Bennett and Simone sat in blessed quiet. Simone's phone was off. She'd turned it off the moment they'd gotten in the car. "How long until this dies down?" she asked. "Honestly, it might not. This is going to be taught in law schools, written about in legal journals, referenced in discrimination cases." "Great. I'm going to be a case study." "No." Justice Bennett turned to look at her daughter. "You're going to be an example." "There's a difference." They drove through the streets of Los Angeles as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and gold. Justice Bennett's house in Pacific Palisades sat on a quiet street with an ocean view. It was Spanish colonial style, built in the 1930s with white stucco walls and terracotta roof tiles. Inside it was filled with books and art and the comfortable clutter of a life well lived. Simone dropped her backpack by the door, her purple highlighter visible through the open pocket, and collapsed on the living room couch. The familiar space, the place she'd grown up, the place that felt safe, seemed to absorb some of the tension from her body. Justice Bennett brought her tea. They sat together, looking out at the Pacific Ocean through the large windows that lined the back of the house. "What happens now?" Simone asked. "Now you rest. Tomorrow you can decide if you want to make any statements, talk to anyone, or just ignore all of it. This is your experience. You get to control how you respond to it. I don't want to be a spokesperson. I don't want to go on the news or write an article or do interviews. Then don't. Just because something is public doesn't mean you owe the public anything beyond what you've already given." They sat in silence for a while. The sun was setting over the ocean, the light turning the water into liquid gold. "Your grandfather would be proud of you," Justice Bennett said softly. "The way you handled yourself today. The dignity, the strength. That's his legacy. I was scared the whole time. Courage isn't the absence of fear, baby. It's acting with integrity despite the fear." Simone's phone, still off, sat on the coffee table. Outside, the world was dissecting what had happened, analyzing it, discussing it, sharing it. But inside this house, with the ocean outside and her mother beside her, Simone let herself just be. Just a young woman who'd had a terrible experience on a plane. Just a law student who wanted to finish her case brief on Brown versus Board of Education. Just a daughter safe at home processing trauma while wrapped in the love of family and the knowledge that she'd stood her ground. Tomorrow would bring more news, more attention, more consequences for Victoria Ashford. But tonight was for healing. 36 hours after the incident, Victoria Ashford sat alone in a conference room at Ashford & Partners. Across from her sat three people: her uncle Richard Ashford, managing partner Michael Torres, the firm's HR director, and Jennifer Walsh, general counsel. On the table between them lay a printed screenshot from Daniel Rodriguez's video. Victoria's face frozen mid-rant. Underneath current views, 22.7 million. Richard spoke first. The executive committee voted unanimously. "We're terminating your partnership effective immediately." Victoria had known this was coming, but hearing it spoken made it real. "Richard, please. We've received over 4,000 emails, lost 6 major clients. 3 federal judges called. The NAACP is reviewing every case you've touched. And Justice Bennett filed that ethics complaint." He slid documents across the table. "We've also received internal complaints. 14 associates reporting discriminatory behavior over the past decade." Victoria's eyes snapped up. "What comments about diversity hires? Questions about credentials when associates of color were promoted?" Several associates documented specific quotes. Michael opened a folder. "You allegedly told one black associate she should be grateful for opportunities through affirmative action." You questioned whether a Hispanic attorney was really qualified for complex regulatory work. Those weren't... I didn't mean... We managed these internally, Richard said heavily. We counseled you. We believed you'd do better. But we didn't address the root problem. Jennifer slid a termination agreement across. 24 hours to sign. If you contest, we release all internal complaints publicly. Richard stood to leave. At the door, he paused. You were brilliant, Victoria. You worked hard. You earned your success. But somewhere along the way, you started believing that made you better than others. That poisoned everything you'd built. I'm not a racist, Victoria said desperately. Then what would you call what happened on that plane? She had no answer. At D.C. Bar headquarters, investigator Thomas Brennan assembled his case. 7 videos from different angles, witness statements from Jordan, Daniel, Ashley, Carlos, and 4 other passengers, Justice Bennett's detailed complaint, but he also had Victoria's disciplinary file, 3 previous complaints over 8 years, all alleging discriminatory behavior, all resolved quietly with counseling provided and matter closed. The bar had given her chances. She'd squandered them. Brennan typed his report. Clear and convincing evidence of Rules 8.4d and G violations. Behavior was egregious, public, captured on video, viewed by millions. Recommendation: fast track to hearing. Proposed sanction: 3-year suspension with mandatory ethics training before reinstatement. The hearing was scheduled for 8 weeks out. Victoria's life unraveled in a cascade of disconnections. Her husband filed for separation within 24 hours. I can't defend this. Her sister's text. What you did was unforgivable. Her mother's voicemail voice tight. I don't know what to say. I raised you better. On day 4, Victoria tried to go to Whole Foods. A woman in the parking lot recognized her. That's her. That's the racist lawyer. Victoria dropped her groceries. A jar of pasta sauce shattered on the pavement, red, spreading like accusation. She ran to her car and drove home, crying, her phone buzzing with message after message from a world that was erasing her from it. LinkedIn connections, 2, 400 to 312. Country club membership revoked. Charity boards resignations requested. When she got home, she sat on her couch and finally let herself understand. Everyone she knew had made the same calculation. Association with her was toxic, and they'd all chosen to cut the connection. The isolation wasn't just professional, it was complete, and she'd earned every bit of it. 2 weeks after the incident, American Airlines CEO Robert Isom stood before 400 flight attendants in Fort Worth. Behind him, a screen displayed Victoria Ashford's face mid-rant. This image has been seen by over 40 million people. It represents the worst behavior we can allow on our aircraft. And it happened on an American Airlines flight. He paused. A lifetime ban for one person isn't enough. It doesn't prevent the next incident. He clicked to the next slide. Today, I'm announcing the Bennett Protocol, named after Justice Nicole Bennett and her daughter, Simone. The room went silent. First, mandatory anti-bias training every quarter for all customer-facing employees. No exceptions. Second, anonymous reporting system via mobile app. Every report triggers automatic investigation. Third, zero tolerance. Any harassment or discrimination equals immediate removal and lifetime ban. First offense. Fourth, the Bennett Scholarship Program. $50,000 annually to law students from underrepresented backgrounds. Fifth, Justice Bennett has agreed to serve on our Diversity Advisory Board. Applause erupted. Jordan Mitchell in the 3rd row had tears streaming down his face. These changes aren't PR. They're operational requirements. If you can't treat every passenger with dignity regardless of race, appearance, or any other factor, you can't work here. He gestured toward Jordan. Jordan Mitchell handled this situation with professionalism. He's been promoted to lead our international crews and will help design the Bennett Protocol training. Jordan stood overwhelmed as colleagues applauded. 3 weeks later, United announced the Unity Initiative with similar measures. Delta followed. then Southwest, then JetBlue, then Alaska. Within 2 months, every major U.S. carrier had comprehensive anti-discrimination policies. The Department of Transportation took notice. Secretary Pete Buttigieg, industry moved faster than regulation when properly motivated. However, we're developing federal guidelines. Law schools scrambled to update curricula. Harvard added the Ashford Case professional conduct in the age of viral media. Stanford created the Bennett Award for Grace Under Pressure, given annually to students demonstrating dignity when facing discrimination. Georgetown invited Justice Bennett for commencement. She accepted with one condition: Simone would co-present. Legal scholars wrote articles analyzing off-duty attorney conduct. One influential Harvard Law Review piece, "You're Always Practicing: Why Off-Duty Discrimination Violates Professional Rules." Corporate America took note. Fortune 500 companies updated codes of conduct. HR departments revised training. Don't be. Victoria Ashford entered the corporate lexicon. 4 months later, Justice Bennett wrote a dissent in an airport security case. Her opinion included a footnote that would be cited hundreds of times. Dignity is not a perk of first class. It is a right of personhood. When we allow space, whether an airport, aircraft, courtroom, or any public accommodation, to be weaponized against those who look different, dress differently, or exist differently from a perceived norm, we violate not just law, but the foundational principle that all persons are equal under law. Some learn this in law school, others when privilege cannot protect them from consequences. But every person in power, every institution serving the public, must learn it. The alternative is division by invisible lines of who belongs and who must prove their right to exist. That is not the society our Constitution envisions. Legal blogs picked it up immediately. Within a week, attorneys were citing it in briefs. It became known as the Bennett Principle, and it started in seat 3J Flight 447 with a young woman and her purple highlighter who refused to give up her space. 8 weeks post-incident. Victoria walked into the D.C. bar hearing room with her court-appointed attorney, David Kim. She couldn't afford private counsel. The severance was gone. Her house was on the market. Marcus had filed for divorce. 3 panel members sat elevated. Judge Marsha Thompson, distinguished black woman, D.C. Superior Court veteran. Attorney James Whitmore, white, 60s ethics specialist. And Professor Linda Chen, Georgetown, Law Professional Responsibility. In the gallery, reporters, NAACP representative attorneys from the D.C. community. And Jordan Mitchell in the back row. The Board on Professional Responsibility will hear. In re Victoria Ashford, Judge Thompson announced. "Ms. Ashford, you're represented by David Kim." "Yes, Your Honor." David stood briefly. "We've reviewed the complaint investigative report, witness statements, and approximately 2 hours of video. Ms. Ashford, do you wish to make a statement?" Victoria stood. She'd prepared careful remarks with David acknowledging wrongdoing without admitting explicit racism. But what came out was different. "Your Honor, I don't know what to say." Her voice cracked. "I've watched the videos, all of them. I see what everyone sees." David touched her arm, trying to stop her, but she continued. I thought I was enforcing standards. I thought I had a right to question whether she belonged. I was wrong." She sat down heavily, unable to continue. Judge Thompson leaned forward. "Ms. Ashford, do you understand why your behavior was wrong? I do now." "I didn't then. Explain." Victoria's hands shook. "I saw a young black woman in casual clothes and I made assumptions. I decided she didn't fit my idea of who belongs in first class. I didn't see her Stanford hoodie as credentials. I saw it as not appropriate, not meeting my standards. Standards based on what Victoria closed her eyes, based on appearance, on race, on my own prejudice that I didn't even recognize as prejudice." Professor Chen spoke quietly. "That's the first honest thing you've said in 8 weeks." Victoria nodded. "I know. I spent those weeks trying to find excuses, trying to explain it away as security concerns or protocol enforcement, but it was prejudice. I was racist in that moment, and I'm ashamed. The panel deliberated for 45 minutes. When they returned, Judge Thompson's face was grave. Ms. Ashford, this board finds you violated Rules 8.4D and G. Your conduct was prejudicial to justice and manifested racial bias. Your behavior was egregious, public, and has damaged the legal profession's reputation. Victoria closed her eyes. We've considered your statement today, your acknowledgement finally of the true nature of your conduct. We've also reviewed 3 previous complaints involving similar allegations. Judge Thompson leaned forward. This board recommends to the D.C. Court of Appeals 3-year suspension of your license. During suspension, complete 100 hours of diversity and implicit bias training. Submit quarterly progress reports. Complete 50 hours community service at legal aid organizations serving communities of color. Before petitioning for reinstatement, you must demonstrate genuine understanding and change. Reinstatement is not guaranteed. It must be earned. Do you understand? Victoria nodded, unable to speak. The Court of Appeals will make final determination, but our recommendations are rarely overturned. Prepare for a 3-year minimum suspension. The gavel came down. Victoria sat in her car in the parking garage for an hour afterward. 3 years. 3 years without practicing law. 3 years of remedial training like a first-year student. But what hurt most was the recognition that even at the hearing she'd almost defended herself again. Almost tried to justify, almost claimed it was about something other than race. She'd spent 8 weeks in denial, and it had taken losing everything job, marriage, friends status to finally see the truth. She pulled up the video one final time on her phone, watched herself point at Simone, heard herself say standards and mix of passengers. For the first time, she didn't try to explain it away. She just saw it. Prejudice, bias, racism. Her prejudice, her bias, her racism. The video had 28.4 million views, 28 million witnesses to the moment she'd revealed who she truly was. She finally started her car and drove to her Georgetown townhouse, the for sale sign bright in the yard. Inside, everything was packed, her life in boxes. She sat on the floor and let herself cry, not for what she'd lost, but for what she'd done, and for the painful understanding that she couldn't undo any of it. She could only try slowly to become someone different, someone who didn't see a young black woman in a Stanford hoodie with a purple highlighter and assume she didn't belong. Someone who understood that dignity wasn't tied to dress codes or status or appearances. Someone better than the woman captured in 28.4 million video views. It would take years, maybe a lifetime. But for the first time, Victoria understood the work ahead of her, and why it mattered. 1 year and 2 weeks post-incident, Simone Bennett stood on stage at the American Constitution Society's National Convention in D.C., accepting the Civil Rights Advocate Award. She'd finished second year at Stanford in the top 5%. Published 2 law review articles on constitutional protections against discrimination, won the National Mock Trial Competition, accepted a summer associate position at Williams & Connolly. The incident hadn't defined her, but it had shaped her trajectory. In her acceptance speech, "A year ago, I was reading Brown vs. Board on an airplane with my purple highlighter, trying to understand how we got from state-sponsored segregation to constitutional protections today. Then I became part of that ongoing story. I learned the fight for dignity isn't just history. It's every day in airports and courtrooms and schools. It requires all of us to stand firm when someone tries to make us smaller." The audience stood and applauded. In the front row, Justice Bennett watched with pride and love and the bittersweet knowledge that Simone had been forced to grow up faster than any parent wants. 3 days later, Simone was back at Dulles, flying to L.A. before her summer position started. In the flagship lounge, the same lounge where Victoria had first spotted her, Simone sat by the window with her laptop and her purple highlighter, feeling comfortable, calm, certain of her right to be there. At gate B42, she handed her boarding pass to Lucia, who'd become a friend. Going home for a visit. Just a few days. Mom wants to celebrate before I start at Williams and Connolly. She should be proud. We all are. Simone was first in line for boarding. First class seat 2A. As she walked down the jet bridge, she saw her. Victoria Ashford, standing in the Zone 4 line. No priority boarding, no elite status. Just another passenger. They made eye contact across the crowd. Victoria's face cycled through emotions. Recognition, shame, resignation. She'd changed. Hair pulled back, simply not helmet sprayed. Plain navy pantsuit from Target, not Chanel. Carrying her own bag. For a moment, they just looked at each other. Simone felt nothing. Not anger, not triumph, just profound indifference. She gave Victoria a small, polite nod, the kind you'd give any stranger, then turned and walked down the jet bridge. Behind her, Victoria waited with Zone 4, waited for her middle seat in row 38, waited for her turn to board the plane where she'd once demanded another passenger be removed. Simone settled into 2A. Window. First class. Stowed her bag, accepted sparkling water, pulled out her laptop. She was working on an article, preparing for her summer position, moving forward with her life. She didn't think about Victoria at all. In 38B, Victoria sat between a college student and a businessman squeezed into a middle seat trying to make herself small. She'd flown economy dozens of times this year, lost her elite status, lost priority boarding, lost the assumption of luxury. She'd learned to wait in long security lines, to check bags, to accept middle seats without complaint. She'd learned humility, but she'd also learned something else. Economy wasn't degrading because it was economy. It was just normal. Regular people flying to live their lives. There was no hierarchy of human worth based on seat assignments. About an hour in Victoria needed the restroom. She walked toward the back, passing through first class. She saw Simone in 2A, saw her working on her laptop, purple highlighter on the tray table, completely absorbed. Simone didn't even notice her. Victoria kept walking, used the restroom, returned to her seat, and realized. Simone had moved on so completely that Victoria's presence didn't register. That was the ultimate consequence. Not job loss or bar suspension or social isolation, but irrelevance. Victoria had tried to erase Simone from a space, and in the end, Victoria was the one erased. When the plane landed, Simone deplaned first, collected her bag, texted her mom, headed to the exit. She was starting an exciting summer position, building a career defending civil rights, living her life free from constantly proving her right to exist. Behind her, Victoria waited for Zone 4 to deplane, waited to disappear into the crowd. She had a consulting job in Phoenix, small apartment in Virginia, 80 hours completed of her mandated training, community service at a Southeast D.C. legal aid clinic. She was rebuilding, but she would never forget the cost of her prejudice, or the young woman with the purple highlighter who'd refused to be diminished. The ultimate karma wasn't that Victoria Ashford lost her job, her status, or her law license. It wasn't that she became a viral symbol of prejudice caught on camera. The ultimate karma was that she became irrelevant. She'd tried to erase Simone from a space to make her invisible, to treat her as if she didn't belong. And in the end, Victoria was the one erased not from existence, but from significance. Simone graduated Stanford Law with honors, clerked for a federal judge, built a career defending civil rights. She became exactly what generations had sacrificed for her to be free to exist anywhere without question. Her purple highlighter became something of a legend at Stanford. Students started using them in tribute. She kept her grandfather's Timex watch and her mother's lessons about dignity. And she never apologized for taking up space she'd earned the right to occupy. Victoria spent 3 years rebuilding from scratch, learning through painful experience what should have been learned through basic decency, that dignity belongs to everyone, And privilege isn't permission to diminish others. She completed her training. She did her community service. She petitioned for reinstatement. But she would never practice at a major firm again, never regain the status she'd lost. She'd become a cautionary tale taught in law schools as an example of how one moment can define or end a career. The Bennett Protocol still protects millions of passengers today across every major airline. Jordan trains flight attendants nationwide on recognizing bias before it escalates. Daniel's video, viewed over 60 million times, is used in implicit bias training at corporations and police academies. Justice Bennett continues serving with the same quiet dignity she showed that day. Dignity that doesn't need defense because it's inherent earned through decades of excellence. When people ask Simone about the incident, she says simply, "I didn't do anything special. I just existed in a space I had every right to occupy." The fact that this became extraordinary says everything about the work still to do. She keeps her purple highlighter as a reminder not of that day, but of all the days since when she's used it to mark up briefs defending others' right to exist without question. If you've faced discrimination anywhere, your presence was questioned, your story matters. Share it in the comments below. When we speak up, when we refuse to be diminished, when we document injustice and demand accountability, we build a world where dignity is a right, not a perk. And here's what I need you to do right now. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it reminded you that standing up for what's right actually matters, hit that like button. Seriously, take 1 second and show this video some love. It helps more people see stories like this. Then hit subscribe and turn on that notification bell. Because I share stories like this every single week. Real stories about justice, about courage, about people who refuse to be made smaller. Stories that remind us we're not powerless when we witness injustice. And finally, share this video. Send it to someone who needs to see it. Post it on your social media. Because the more people who see what happened to Simone and her mother, the harder it becomes for the next Victoria Ashford to get away with discrimination. Your engagement, your shares, your comments, they matter. They're how we turn one story into a movement. They're how we make sure that the next young person with a purple highlighter and a hoodie just trying to exist in peace doesn't have to face what Simone faced. So subscribe, share, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and if you've ever witnessed or experienced something like this. Let's build a community that doesn't just watch injustice happen but stands up and says, "Not anymore." Thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.